Oh, we're back again. We obviously had a whole heap of questions that we couldn't get through from our live interview the other day. So we're going to try work through the remaining questions. There's a lot of good ones here. One of the ones to kick off is, how does writing moment compare to AC50 when foiling and in displacement mode? Any numbers associated?
Yeah. So an AC50 was in the region of 13 tonne metres. So that means if you have 13 tonnes sitting on a 1 metre lever arm, that's the amount of roll moment that the sails wing generate. The AC75 in displacement mode is going to be pretty similar to that. It's a bigger boat, but a lot narrower when you're not foiling. When you get up on the foils, then suddenly you're taking the lift from way out to leeward rather than from the displacement of the hull. So we go from up by more than 3 times, up to about 45 tonne metres riding moment.
Okay, I got another question here. Calcio Cavallari, will be weight on the foils? So, will there be weight on the foils? I think it's the question. Yeah, sure there will be. The foils won't be the lightest possible foils we can build, that's for sure. There's some rules around that. Dan, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, the foil has a minimum weight and a CG position. It has to be a certain distance from the pivot from the cant axis. So yeah, we're not looking for them to be as light as possible. Probably the foil arms, that's the bit extending from the hull, will be carbon fibre composite. And the foil wings, we want to get weight into those, like getting weight into a keel, and they'll probably be mostly steel.
Okay, another one relative to the foils from Barry Swanston. Will the foils have trim tabs, or will you be able to change the foil pitch of the foil?
Right, so yeah, good question. On the AC50 catamarans, we moved the whole foil, so the foil was a rigid part. We're moving away from that to actually have flaps on the trailing edges of the foil wings, which is, there's a number of reasons, but it's a lot more efficient to move a flap than to move a whole foil. It requires a lot less energy, and it simplifies the mechanism. Because these foils will be canting through a wide range, just having that one cant axis is a lot simpler than having to move in cant and in rake at the point where the foil joins the hull.
Okay, I've got another one here from Doug Schickler. Can you speak about crew safety in this cycle? In the Bermuda Cup, there were some serious concerns, BAR versus Japan particularly. What are we thinking this time? Man overboard situations?
Yeah. And we talked a bit about that in the live thing on Facebook. I think the biggest risk on any of these high performance boats is hitting the boat you're on, whether it's hitting a dagger board or a rudder if you fall overboard. And we've worked pretty hard in this rule to improve safety in that area by requiring crew to be tethered if they go forward of the foils and making sure that the rudder elevators are narrower than the boat at the transom, so there's reduced chance of hitting a rudder elevator if you fall overboard. There's also a lot of questions about one boat hitting another with the foils, which they do look pretty scary when you see those big foils sticking out the side of the boat. But in reality, the crew are in the centre of the boat. The boats they just have to view them as being as wide as a multi-hull, and whether you're hitting a foil that's sticking out the side of the boat or a foil that's in the hull of a multi-hull, it's not really that different. The plan is to have virtual boundaries around the boat, so rather than waiting until 2 boats actually come into contact to get a penalty, penalties will be awarded if this virtual box around the boats come into contact, which will allow skippers to push really hard in terms of boat-on-boat situations, but get the penalty before there's real damage.
Yeah, I think that's a real good point. There's certainly a number of rules to mitigate as much risk as possible, and certainly this virtual boundaries and the tether on the crews going forward being a rule is quite big changes. From Live Sail Die, now that you have a boat that requires more crew, would there be opportunities for women to be involved? Well, there's nothing to stop that. You're going to have heavy people and light people, so yeah, it's up to the team to make their own decisions. Now the rules wide open.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a maximum crew weight which averages at 90 kilos per sailor with 11 sailors, but there's plenty of big grinders out there well over 90. So there's actually, all teams will be looking for some light people, whether it's in helming or trimming roles. So yeah, I think there's, every team is just going to pick the best sailors available for those jobs, and whether that's a guy or a girl, I think we take the best people.
Okay, live, sail, die again. When are we going to see the first working example of this craft?
The first date that you're allowed to launch one of these boats is 1st of April 2019. Remains to be seen if teams will actually go for that, or whether they'll allow themselves a bit more design time and push out more to May or to June next year.
From Duncan Adams, can teams run other boats to test systems?
Yeah, the rule allows teams to use smaller boats to develop R&D and systems up to 38 feet in length. So that's about a half-size AC75.
Okay, Barry, back again. Barry Swanston, this is a good question, I think. Is there an expected afterlife for the new boats compared to the last Cup boats? Keep the boat sailing after the Cup.
Do you want to go over that one, right?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good point, Barry, and it's certainly been an issue with the previous America's Cups. There's a lot of boats sitting around not being used, or they're extremely expensive to keep running. That has been brought into consideration for sure. We will have these boats sitting in marinas around the world as our hope afterwards, and we definitely would like to see these boats having an afterlife, and yeah, that's definitely part of the plan.
Obviously, we can't predict the future, and if we don't win, if we don't defend this Cup, then just like every other Cup winner, it's up to them what they want to do. But certainly, that's our intention. That this would be the first of many iterations of this type of boat.
Okay, Barry Swanston's back again. He's pretty active, so he's asking about the wind limits. Are there any wind limits upper and lower? So Dan, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure there will be some wind limits in the races. No one wants the America's Cup to be decided by a drift off, or at the other end of the scale, we don't want to see it decided by what boat sort of survives in boat breaking conditions. But we've designed these boats to be really good racing yachts across a wide range. I think in terms of the exact numbers, we'll wait until we've got the boats on the water, see how they behave at both ends of the spectrum, and from that decide what it makes most sense to base the wind limits on.
I've got a couple of technical questions. I'm assuming you decided on 75 feet to ensure that concept would work in typical inshore sailing weather conditions. Have you done any simulations to establish a rough cut-off length that a scaled down version would no longer foil, or does this concept scale down in simulations to more everyday hull lengths, such as a fast 40?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the bigger the boat, in general, the more sea state it's able to cope with, because by comparison, the waves get smaller as the boat gets bigger. But yeah, absolutely, this scales down. And in fact, we're very likely to see teams building smaller scale boats for testing R&D in the range of about 38 foot is probably the size that teams will build test boats at. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's probably going to be a pretty exciting smaller boat for inner harbour racing. The flat water is always a good thing with foiling. Mike Baird, firstly, how much do you think sea state may impact the foiling design, e.g. large swells? Secondly, do you think this design will be seen in future Volvo editions?
For sure, the boats will be easier to sail in flat water than they will in a sea state, but I think in the conditions we're going to see out here in the Gulf, it's certainly part of the design brief that we can sail in a range of conditions. There's a lot of volume forward in the boat, so that if we do come off the foils, that we're pretty well protected there. So I don't think exactly this class of boat would be a round the world boat at all. It's designed as an inshore match racing boat, coping with reasonable inshore sea state. But I don't know, Ray, do you think a version of this type of boat could ever be a round the world boat?
I think the boats would at best get somewhere between an Amoca and something like this. I think this is too extreme for the Volvo, and to be a fully foiling monohull offshore, like we all saw the footage in the Southern Ocean, it's pretty sketchy conditions, and you got to finish. But we saw some amazing footage from the Amoca 60s, and those boats will get pretty exciting. How would the power system work? Hydraulics, electrics, winches, etc.? Good question.
So there's a range of options there. On the hydrodynamic surfaces, the parts of the control of the boat under the water, that's the foils and the rudder, they'll be powered in the first place by batteries, and either going to electric motors that drive the foil flaps or the rudders directly, or electric motors that turn hydraulic pumps which power hydraulic cylinders. Then everything above the deck, all the movement of the sails, hoisting code zeros, trimming, and trimming the jib, trimming the mainsail, that all has to be human power. So that's going to be pedestals. And again, that's open to options. So teams might elect to be mainly mechanical, where pedestals are connected mechanically to winches, or it could be hydraulic, where teams have grinding pedestals connected to hydraulic pumps. So it could well be a combination of the two.
Okay, another one from Toby Bryant, talking about ride height control. Are we allowed systems like wands as per moths? Any assistance there?
No, we've decided to not allow either a sort of electronic autopilots or the kind of moth-style wand. I think if it was a pure design competition, it would be really interesting, and you could go to town absolutely on doing full autopilot on ride height, on wing trim, and ultimately even it'd be interesting to look at steering the boat automatically. But we want this to remain a sailing competition where sailors are very much involved, and so we're not allowing autopilots of any kind, whether it's mechanical or electronic.
Okay, there's an interesting one from Jack Griffin about a capsized boat, and will you have to point the bow into the wind for it to self-right? That's a good question. It'll depend on the conditions a bit. I think in some situations, you would probably have to get the bow into the wind, and then that obviously lets wind get under the mainsail and self-rights it. Other conditions, the bow's already downwind, the favoured side, and it'll pop up quite quickly. So these boats will self-right. Like any boat, you try to get a moth upright when it's facing the wrong way is extremely hard. So any capsized boat, you do want to get the bow into the wind. Okay, look, thanks for participating in this. This is new for us, and hopefully we'll get better and better at it. Hopefully we do a bit more of this, and you guys are thinking it's a good thing.